Bhante is a British Buddhist monk ordained in Theravada tradition since 1907. So he is the founder and principal teacher of the Buddhist Bangkok Sangha, which for a long time was the only Sangha offering Dharma talk in English in Bangkok. So Bhante has a degree in psychology and master in business studies. And he is known to be a very engaging speaker who effortlessly makes his connection between Buddha's teachings and the contemporary understanding of the consciousness. So Bhante has specific interest in psychology, and he often incorporates fairy tales in his Dharma talks. And many of the media of his talks are available online, and it can be found on YouTube at littlebank.org and as well as the AB website. And Bhante is coming to Sydney next year, next April and May, and Bhante will conduct a retreat at Vijayasala, and we will plan a series of activities while Bhante is here. So we are looking forward to that. And having said that, if anyone would like to offer dana to support Bhante's traveling expenses, please either you want to contact me or you can go to the website and put your donation there and just indicate that it's for Bhante's Pandit. All right. So over to you, Bhante. Thank you very much for being here again for us and for the support of your teaching for the past years and supporting AB community. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So you suggested we sit for a short while first, right? So, and also anybody, latecomers may be able to come in. So settle yourself into your regular meditation mode. Try to get into the zone. As a meditator, we should be able to put everything down and stop and be aware without the mind wandering off. If you find the mind does wander off into thoughts, feelings, or sensations, bring the attention back. Bringing the attention back means you're mindful, clear in the present moment. So we'll just sit for a few minutes. So do try to put in the effort to keep re-establishing attention. So turn your attention to the idea of metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, feeling others' pain. Mudita, sympathetic joy, feeling happy for others' successes. And upekkha, equanimity, bringing these four qualities together into the mind, bright, clear, radiating this well-wishing for all well-beings. Sabhe buddha balapata pachekanancha yang balang arahanta nancha tejena rakang bandami sabbaso sabba buddha nubawena satta soti bhavantu te. Sabhe buddha balapata pachekanancha yang balang arahanta nancha tejena rakang bandami sabbaso Sabbatammanubhavena satta soti bhavantu te. Sabbe buddha balapata pachekanancha yang balang arahanta nancha tejena rakang bandami sabbaso. Sabba sanghanubhavena satta soti bhavantu te.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay, so relax your posture. Okay, so this time round, I wanted to talk about the elephant's footprint. So this is a sutta, and I do think that as Buddhists, we should keep coming back to the original suttas as often as we can. There are many other interesting topics and angles. I do like fairy tales. I like the stories and teachings from other Buddhist traditions, but the Theravada suttas are the most poignant and the most precise and systematic religious teaching that I've ever come across. However, what happens is a lot of Buddhism has become kind of pseudo-science or pseudo-psychology, and which has come a long way or moved a long way from the original teachings. So, for example, I heard that the Buddha taught that we have to destroy the ego. And I found this interesting because I know that nowhere in the suttas is there ever any mention of an ego. Ego is a psychological term pretty much invented by Sigmund Freud. And in that context, the ego in Freudian psychology is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. The ego is something that can act from the wisdom principle rather than the pleasure principle. So what Freud said was, as animals, part of us is driven by sense desire. We just want to get something that feels good, tastes good, smells good. But another part of your mind is driven by a higher or a wisdom principle and can do what's good for you rather than what is pleasant. So you may think eating a pizza is very pleasant. Your id, the pleasure principle, says eat the pizza or eat the ice cream. But your wisdom principle says no, eating the ice cream is too much sugar or the pizza is too much fat. You may like to play tennis or computer games, but your ego would tell you, no, you're better off going to school. So the way Freud taught about the ego was as a good thing and something that needs to be developed. I think the Buddha said the same thing. He said you should develop good qualities, namely the 10 paramita, wisdom, morality, perseverance, concentration, loving kindness, these kind of qualities. So a lot of Buddhism I've seen has become a pseudo-psychology teaching, and sometimes not even good psychology. Other times it is good psychology, but it's not the original teaching. So I always want to say to anybody who's listening, or remind people that the Buddha taught about enlightenment. He wasn't teaching on how to be less angry or how to be a nicer person. These things are practicing good qualities, which he certainly taught and agreed with. But the central part of his teaching was that there is a supernatural almost, or a super mundane attainment that can be made, something that you would know that changes everything, that you don't know now, and that this attainment is something that needs to be made, and it's something that can be reached through meditation and deep meditation. So that central message that there is this quality of enlightenment, I feel often gets lost or missed out. I think in large part because we don't fully understand what it is. Until you are a fully enlightened arahant, it's going to be difficult to talk about or say what it is. And truth be told, even the enlightened gurus from past to present have had trouble trying to describe it or describe what you need to do to get to it. So then that teaching of enlightenment gets put to the side and gets replaced with often lesser teachings about how you can, honestly, I saw a Dharma talk that somebody gave, and the theme of the talk was how to deal with the suffering and dejection, I think was the word, that arises from Donald Trump winning the election. And she really felt that this is such a traumatic event that we need to use Dharma to try and not get too dejected in the world as everything is falling apart. I'm not so sure what Donald Trump did that was so wrong, but anyway, that's just my view. Well, that's not Dharma, really. The Buddha was talking about enlightenment. There's plenty of politics going on at his time. He didn't talk about that. He didn't get involved in that. Even when his home city was attacked and destroyed by the Kosalans, the main clan in the area, he didn't get involved. He was talking about this enlightenment, something completely other, different, deeper, that changes everything if it is touched on. And this is the mystic path, the path of bringing the mind out of the simple mechanistic nature of sense desire and living life to turning the attention inwards and finding this, I would like to say, mystic union with God. I hope you don't mind me using Christian terms. Sometimes they make more sense to some people, sometimes not. But it is something that saints and sages throughout the world, in every culture, have started to understand. They withdraw from society, they go to the roots of trees, mountains, caves, and enter into this meditation with varying degrees of success. So there is this innate desire within human beings. And I would say, as described by the Buddha, that enlightenment is something that's etched into the architecture of consciousness, is not something that arises from belief. It doesn't really matter too much what your beliefs are. It's not something that is attained to by like a skill, like learning the piano or learning a language, that we have to apply ourselves and learn a new skill. It is something that is the foundation of life itself, of consciousness itself. And when we are willing to put aside the ordinary mind, then we can enter into this this union. In Christianity is called union with God. And the reason it's called that is because everything that you are has to get out of the way in order for this new thing to arise. So in Buddhist terminology, this other thing is called the unconditioned, asangata dhamma, the unconditioned. And the Buddha said that there is the unconditioned. If there was not the unconditioned, there would be no goal of the holy life. But because there is the unconditioned, there is the goal of the holy life. So he very clearly was talking about a mystic experience and understanding that when touched upon will motivate somebody into a lifelong spiritual practice and is the goal of the actual practice. We are not just trying to be nicer people or better people. We are not just learning to recite teachings or remember teachings, that there is a real genuine goal at the end of it. So this teaching of enlightenment, I think, is something that we need to bear in mind and keep in mind as Buddhists. So there was one sutta. I'm going to put the link to the sutta into the chat so you can see it if you prefer. And shortly I'm going to do a screen share as we go into it. Give my Bluetooth keyboard a second to catch up. There we go. So this sutta is called the Sutra on the Lesser Elephant's Footprint, or you could say the Lesser Sutta on the elephant's footprint. So in it, there was a person who went to one of the Buddha's disciples, and he said that you seem to really have some attainment. Can you tell me what this attainment is? And the monk said, well, you really have to go and see the Buddha for this. So there is a whole introduction to the sutta. But in short, the person asks the monk, how do you know that the teaching of the Buddha is the real teaching? And he said, well, there is an analogy. If you see an elephant's footprint in the forest, you know that this is the footprint of the greatest and the largest animal of the forest, because all other animal footprints will fit within it. He said, in the same way, the teaching of the Buddha is complete and perfect, and any other teaching that is good will fit somewhere within the Buddha's teaching, but the Buddha's teaching is the only one that has the complete path. So the man was quite inspired by this, and goes to find the Buddha himself. So he pays homage to the Buddha himself, and he goes up to the Buddha, exchanges greetings, and then he sits down to one side and tells the Buddha that he had had this discussion with the Buddha's disciple called Pilotika, who had told him about the elephant's footprint. And the Buddha said to him, well, the simile of the elephant's footprint is not yet complete in detail. So he talks, he teaches this man, suppose an elephant tracker were to see a large elephant's footprint and would know this was the elephant's footprint. But really, he does not yet come to the conclusion. Why? Because there may be other elephants with other footprints who aren't the greatest bull elephant. So this goes on for a while. We can skip some of this, but in short, the Buddha is saying that only when you follow the footprints and you come to the bull elephant itself do you know that this really is the footprint of the greatest bull elephant. He said, in the same way, you may hear the teaching of the Buddha, you may have confidence in the teaching of the Buddha, but you still don't know that this is really the true teaching of the way to enlightenment. So then he enters upon a discourse, which I want to go through with you. And there are, depending how you count them, 10 key elements to the discourse. And in it, he sets out the entirety of the Buddhist path to enlightenment. Now, we should note that he did this a number of times with a number of different people. And each time he describes the path in a slightly different way. So what we're going to see today is not the only way that the Buddha described the path, but it is a typical way that the Buddha would describe the path. So I want to click onto the screen sharing, and if I click share, just give me a thumbs up if you can see the text on your screen. Okay, that looks good. So the first stage of the path is interesting. He says, well, if you've gained some faith in the Buddha's teaching, you realize living in a house is cramped and dirty, but the life of one who has gone forth is wide open. The word going forth means to become a monk or a samana. It's not easy for someone living at home to lead the spiritual life full and pure like a polished shell. So I think to myself, I will shave off my hair and beard. I will dress in robes and go forth into the monkhood. So here was one of the first interesting points in the sutta. He's definitely saying that you should become a monk. That leaves the question, well, what about lay people? Can lay people follow the path and become enlightened? My answer to that is, in the modern day, in my experience, I've seen a lot of lay people who are superb meditators, who've had very deep experiences. And I've seen lots of monks who are layabouts. So I don't think becoming a monk itself is necessarily the thing that you have to do. Certainly in the time of the Buddha, he was saying, if you want to practice my teaching, you're really going to have to leave your family and come and practice with me under the trees. But then family life was a lot harder in those days. You work a lot harder, you have less free time, you have less stability, you have larger families that you have to look after. So I'll just leave that with you as a question. Does one have to become a monk in order to practice the path or not? I've given you my opinion. You're welcome to have your opinion, and shortly we'll have time for questions if you want to mention that. So then he comes up with what I think is a really good description of the precepts. And it's quite a nice description. And you might notice that at this time, the monks under the Buddha only followed 8 precepts. This was before the Vinaya. So even for fully ordained monks, 8 precepts were enough to do the to be qualified as a monk. And it's a very nice description of the precepts that he gives. So the first precept, he just says very simply, they give up killing creatures. They renounce the rod and the sword. They're scrupulous and kind and full of compassion for all living beings. That's a really nice way to describe the first precept. Often there are kind of insane discussions and crazy discussions about, well, what about abortion and what about vegetarianism and what about this and that? All good discussions. But in the original context, it was quite clear. You give up the killing of creatures and you live with compassion for living beings. That was a pretty simple, straightforward, way of approaching the precept. It wasn't made complicated. Same for the second precept, which I'm highlighting. It should highlight on your screen. They give up stealing. They take only what's given and expect only what's given. They keep themselves clean by not thieving. So again, lots of discussions about the second precept, and if you watch a movie online, are you stealing it? And all kinds of questions. If you watch YouTube and you have an ad block, are you stealing from Google? I use an ad blocker myself. I know, Meredith, you're quite tolerant of adverts. I remember you said that you can tolerate the adverts. YouTube, by the way, are clamping down right now, and they're suspending the accounts of people who watch YouTube without allowing the adverts. So they've clearly cracking down on that. But look, in the sutta here, it's just very simple and very nice. It's a way to purify your behavior and your mind. You give up stealing. Keep yourself clean by not thieving off people. Next precept, they give up unchastity. They keep celibate and they set apart, avoiding the vulgar act of sex. So again, this was for monks, but again, notice this is just 8 precepts. So it's not like now as a monk, we have something like 5,000 rules in our Vinaya. 227 in the Patimokkha is what gets recited, but there are more than 5,000 in the actual Vinaya text. Originally, he just said, put aside sexuality. You're coming to do practice, purification of the mind. You give up lying. You speak the truth, stick to the truth, you're honest and trustworthy, and you don't trick the world with words. A really nice way to talk about the first part of the third precept. Second part of the third precept, fourth precept. They give up divisive speech. They don't repeat in one place what they heard in another, so as to divide people against each other. Instead, they reconcile those who are divided, supporting unity, delighting in harmony, loving harmony, and speaking words that promote harmony. Again, in my view, just still a really nice, simple, persuasive argument. No deep philosophical discussions of exactly, what is lying and what is not lying, what's divisive and not divisive. Just a really nice description of a nice way to behave. You give up harsh speech. Speak what's mellow, pleasing to the ears, lovely, going to the heart, polite, likable, and agreeable to people. I'm not so keen on this one because sometimes I swear, and I'm careful who I swear with, but I do swear, especially when things annoy me. I was swearing with someone today. I said something gets on my nerves, but I use an unpleasant word. Maybe I need to work on that one. But yes, to be somebody of nice speech. So give up talking nonsense or gossip. Words are timely, true, meaningful, in line with the teachings. They say things at the right time, reasonable and beneficial. These are the 4 aspects of right speech, if you remember. Here he's dividing them into 4, but this comes under musawada, right speech, giving up lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and useless and nonsense speech. They avoid injuring plants and seeds. They eat in only one part of the day, abstaining from eating at the wrong time. By the way, did you know originally monks in the time of the Buddha had no restriction on when they went for their alms round, and they could go any time of the day that they felt like, and they could go as many times as they want in a day. And it was only later on that there was a group of monks who were going down to the village for alms food 4 times a day. And the Buddha found out about this and said, you know, I only go once a day and I'm okay. And the monks went off and they said to each other, well, we only go 4 times a day and we're okay. So that was when the Buddha made the rule that, okay, you only go for alms food once a day. Originally, that wasn't the rule. So if you want to take up the practices, you get self-control about eating. You just eat what's enough. You give up shows of dancing, singing, music. You give up beautifying, adorning yourself with garlands, perfumes, and makeup. You give up high and luxurious beds. You avoid receiving gold and money, raw grain, raw meat, women and girls, male and female servants, goats, sheep, chickens, pigs, elephants, crows, cows, horses, mares, fields, and land. They avoid running errands and messages, buying and selling, falsifying weights, metals or measures, bribery, fraud, cheating, duplicity, mutilation, murder, abduction, banditry, plunder, and violence. That's all pretty reasonable, don't you think? That was, to my mind, a really nice description of just why you take up precepts. We don't need like long, deep philosophical discussions about vegetarianism or I've seen a lot of strange discussions about precepts. So that was the first one. Number 1, you have to hear about Buddhism. Number 2, you come to do the ordination. Number 3, you take up the precepts. Number 4, you become content with just the robes for clothes, just the alms food for your stomach. So to teach yourself contentment with the contentment with little. So traditionally in Buddhism, and certainly for monks, we are taught to be content with 4 things. The robes to protect your body, the food to keep your body alive, the shelter to protect yourself from the elements, and medicine if you need it. So these 4 things, if you have these 4 requisites, then you should be able to practice contentment. It's notable here that contentment is a practice and not something that you just have. So no matter what you have, most people want a little more. And yet most people, certainly in Western societies, including Thailand, actually have enough. We have enough to be content, and practicing contentment is a really beautiful thing. So you've had the hearing about Buddhism, ordain as a monk, you take on the precepts, you practice contentment with little. When you have this spectrum of ethics, you experience a blameless happiness inside yourself. So the next step, I would say step number 5, is what we call guarding of the sense doors. So this has always been my key practice and is the practice that I teach. It's the practice that I do. And I think it's the key practice throughout the Buddhist suttas, but I put a strong emphasis on this. That is, when you see something with your eye, you don't get caught in the features and details of that thing. If you did not guard the faculty of eye in this way, unskillful qualities of liking and disliking would become overwhelming. So you practice restraints, protecting the faculty of the eye and achieving its restraint. So easy, straightforward teaching, but if you see something, don't get caught in the signs and features of that thing. So you see a beautiful woman, a nice car, a nice building, you see something unpleasant that you don't like. My friend here today was complaining some of the canals in Thailand, in Bangkok, are really filthy and disgusting. But what happens is you see something and then your consciousness gets latched onto that thing, fires up, and you are now caught in liking and disliking, in greed and aversion. And your mind becomes obsessed with that thing. And then you've lost mindfulness. So the guarding of the sense doors is keeping this self-possession, really important word, self-possession, that you know yourself and you're not allowing your consciousness to get caught up with something just because you've seen it. Same way for the ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Anything that you can experience that fires up into conscious attention. This is really important. This doesn't mean throughout your life. You can't apply this teaching as a life teaching. It applies only to the thing that has just come up in conscious attention. So you may have heard me say many times, but your attention jumps from one thing to another thing to another thing. Right now, your attention is on the screen. In a second, your attention has gone to the cat coming across your lap. Another second, you've heard somebody in the background. You think, is that somebody coming home? Is that the burglar? Your attention has gone to that. Then your attention comes back. You think, my back aches. And then your attention thinks, what am I having for dinner this evening? And your attention moves from one thing to another thing to another thing. These teachings apply to the thing that has come up in conscious awareness only. So I can't be detached from every sight in the world, but I can maintain this restraint with whatever is coming into my conscious attention right now. This gives you a sense of self-possession, of self-awareness. Gives you a sense of empowerment because things aren't going to demand your attention in the way that they did before. So this practice of guarding the sense doors is really key and really central to maintaining mindfulness. You may remember the teaching on the beauty queen. Have you come across this teaching? Imagine you were to see the most beautiful woman in the world. Would your eye be drawn to that person? Would you turn your head? Well, imagine that on top of your head was a bowl of oil full to the brim. And behind you was a man with a sword who said to you, if a single drop of oil falls out of the bowl on your head, I will cut your head off with a sword. In that condition, if then you saw the most beautiful woman in the world, would your head turn? Would you lose mindfulness? This was a Buddhist sutta. So the answer should be no. If you're really urgent, you maintain that clear, careful awareness. So that is how we guard the sense doors. We maintain this key word in here I want to make over and over again because it gets lost in modern day Buddhism, but this word restraint. Enlightenment is not something that arises up as an attainment that you can do. It's something that manifests when you restrain the mind, when you restrain attention. If you want to know more on that, we will come up in this sutta, but you can also ask questions later. So these are the guarding of the six senses was a key practice. The Buddha says, as he does in every one of these, he gives a reason for it. He says, when you have this noble sense restraint, you experience an unsullied bliss inside yourself. And this is true. This is true. So the next, I think that was number 6, depending how you count them. So this is number 7. And this is practicing mindfulness of refined movements. So we had hearing about enlightenment in becoming a monk, practicing the precepts, being content with little, restraining of the senses. Next one is practicing mindfulness with refined movements. When going out, coming back, looking ahead, looking to the side, bending and extending limbs. when bearing the outer robe, bowl, robes, eating, drinking, chewing, tasting, urinating, defecating, walking, standing, sitting, sleeping, waking, speaking, and keeping silent. You act with situational awareness. Now, situational awareness is sati sampajanya, what we normally call mindfulness. I don't know why, in this case, Bhante Sujato has decided to change the word mindfulness into situational awareness, but here it is sampajanya, so it means a self-collection, recollection in mindfulness. It's what we're practicing in the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So again, he gives a reason for doing this. When you have this spectrum of ethics, this noble contentment, this noble sense restraint, and this noble mindfulness and awareness, whether you frequent lodging in the wilderness, the root of a tree, a hill, a ravine, a mountain cave, a charnel ground, a forest, or open heap of straw, you have this sense of noble restraint and awareness. So these are the practices that one does in general. Now we come to the practices that you are doing in deep meditation. And again, this needs emphasizing that the Buddha was teaching a path of mystic attainment. So if one simply tries to be a good person or live a little bit mindfully, you're unlikely to get to enlightenment. Enlightenment requires deep meditation. So here there comes a deep meditation part. After the meal, he sits down and establishes mindfulness in front of them. This section here is the restraining of the 5 hindrances. So number 1, giving up greed for the world. You meditate with a heart rid of covetousness or greed or desire, cleansing the mind of desire. You give up ill will and malevolence. You meditate with a mind that has no ill will and has compassion for all living beings. You give up dullness and drowsiness. Meditate with a mind rid of dullness and drowsiness. Here's a very important word here that you've heard me say before. Percipient of light, mindful and aware, cleansing the mind of dullness and drowsiness. So if you have overcome the hindrance of dullness and drowsiness, or sloth and torpor, it's often translated as, you must have perception of light in the meditation. Just go back to highlight the full 5 hindrances here. Next hindrance, giving up restlessness and remorse, or flurry and worry is usually translated as. Every time you have a translation, every translator decides that a different word is the best word to use. So Bhante Sujato has done the same. He changes some of the translations. Restlessness and worry or remorse. They meditate without restlessness, their mind being peaceful inside, cleansing the mind of restlessness and remorse. So restlessness and remorse or flurry and worry is the opposite of peace, feeling peaceful inside. You give up doubt, having gone beyond doubt, not undecided about skillful qualities. You cleanse the mind of doubt. So these are the 5 hindrances, the classic teaching. Remember, this is after guarding the sense doors and mindfulness of refined movements. You sit down in meditation, refine the mind, and give up the 5 hindrances. So here he says what happens when you do this. With the 5 hindrances given up, secluded from sense pleasure, secluded from unskillful qualities, you enter and remain in the first jhana, or absorption, which has rapture and bliss born of seclusion while placing the mind and keeping it connected. So again, the slightly different translation to normal, but entering into the first jhana means that you've separated the mind from the sense doors, the six senses. I want to emphasize here, because not many people will tell you, when you have separated the mind from the six senses, the mind is not dull or lost or black or spaced out. There is a sense of extremely intensified life force. It's an intensification of consciousness. So this attainment is not one, nobody had told me this for years and years as I had practiced. And I was expecting jhana to be some kind of blissful space out. It was always translated as trance, as a trance state. I want to tell you that this is like an intensification of consciousness. You feel more alive, more bright, more present, more knowing than in any other state that you can experience. This attainment of jhana, of concentration, the Buddha says in this sutta, this is when you have finally found the footprint of the elephant, when you have found the true teaching of the Buddha, when you have done this. I've highlighted the text. This Brahmin is what is called the footprint of a realized one, or a Buddha, and also a trace of the Buddha and a mark of the Buddha. So he's saying clearly here that when you simply knowing about the teachings is not the true mark of Buddhism. The true mark of Buddhism as an attainment is after the first jhana of concentration. But still more to go. So he comes to the second jhana, which is the same as the first, but the rapture, or the piti, declines or is removed, and you're left with happiness, internal clarity, singleness of the mind, and of the mind being kept together. I want to emphasize in the Pali is Jedaso Eko Dibawang. So Eko Dibawang is unification or becoming one, unification of the mind. And there's definitely this sense that the mind is not scattered. The mind is the opposite of scattered. So the scattered mind thinks about this and this and this and is jumping around. The unified mind isn't going out to anything. It's bright and it's clear. So in the third jhana, this this falls away, and one is equanimous and mindful and meditates in bliss. I think this is the one where in many descriptions the Buddha says, if one has made this attainment, the devas will praise you as somebody who has a beautiful abiding. Interesting. I would like some praise from the devas. That would be nice. Unfortunately, they don't praise you in your ear. They may be praising you out there, but they don't tell you. I wish they'd come and tell me, we praise your attainment. So, and entering into the fourth jhana is also a footprint of the realized one. So after giving up the five hindrances, one attains to 4 jhanas, 4 states of concentration. I might mention here, because again, nobody really told me this. And I think monks are often afraid to talk about attainment of these states for technical reasons. Maybe we shouldn't, but these 4 don't occur in order. So sometimes you have the rapture and the bliss. Sometimes you have the happiness. Sometimes they don't necessarily occur one after the other. One may occur first. Sometimes the mind may concentrate into a very high state of concentration, but no bliss, no rapture. Maybe that's gone first. And then afterwards, as you exit the concentration, the rapture occurs. So I just want to say that don't expect this to happen like A, B, C, D. This can happen. You need to be aware of your own mind that this can happen out of sequence. Here in the teachings, he's always laid out in sequence because there is a logical sequence to it, but there's not necessarily a structural sequence to it. So, for example, you might say to your children, well, you go to school, you get your exams, you go to university, you get an apprenticeship, you get a job, you find somebody to marry, you get married, you have a child. No, you get married, you buy a house, you have a child. But it may be that some people have a child before they get married, or some people buy a house after they've been married and had a child. Or do you know what I mean? You would lay it out in a sequence, but that doesn't necessarily mean that sequence is what will happen. It just means that's a logical kind of progression. So if that makes sense to you, it was something that was never told to me, that these attainments don't go in a nice, neat order that you can fit to a map. So you need to know what's happening rather than try to force fit a teaching. So the Buddha says very clearly, attainment of the four concentrations here are what is called the footprint of a realized one. This word realized one, by the way, is what the Buddha referred to himself as. I've highlighted it here for you. It was called a Tathagata. So you may come across this word from time to time. But the Buddha nearly always referred to himself as a Tathagata. And nobody's ever agreed on what the word Tathagata actually means. It can mean the one who is gone or thus gone, or it can mean the one who is thus come. So gata means to go, and it's not clear whether it's to go or to come in this word. So we don't know what he meant, but Tathagata was the word he used to describe himself. Having made these attainments in concentration, his mind has become immersed in concentration. It has become purified, bright, flawless, rid of corruptions, pliable, workable, steady, imperturbable. And they extend it to three supernatural or supermundane knowledges. The first knowledge is the knowledge of past lives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 100, 1,000 past lives, they recall them. Remembering your past lives is a mark of the Buddha. Second knowledge, he extends it to the knowledge of the birth and death of sentient beings in heaven and hell, according to their karma. So in meditation, you see the realms of the cosmos and beings getting born and passing away in those realms. Now, I can't claim to have any direct knowledge of this myself, but I'll note that my abbot used to teach this, the one who gave me ordination. And some people would come and would have these attainments really quickly. And so he would then teach them to go and see heavens and hells and beings. And so I can't tell you much from my personal experience on how that works, but we can have a discussion if you want about Buddhist cosmology. The third power that is practiced after the attainment of the jhanas is he attains to the what here is called the ending of the defilements. Now the defilements are the asava. So the word asava means the outflowing of consciousness, and consciousness flows out because of sense desire, because of a desire for being, because of ignorance, and because of views and opinions. I got those out of sequence. So it should be because of ignorance, sense desire, desire for being, and views and opinions make the mind flow out and forget its real nature. So this was the third of the three insights. Remember, we finished jhanas, we turned the attention to the three knowledges, past lives, heavens and hells, and what the mind is like when it hasn't no longer flowing out, the ending of which Bhante Sujato translates here as the ending of defilements. So at this point, one knows the Four Noble Truths in entirety. This is the suffering, origin of suffering, cessation of suffering, and the practice that leads to the end of suffering. Just to conclude, because the rest of it isn't so relevant, that's the whole path that the Buddha laid out. But he does say, has an interesting line in this sutta that doesn't appear elsewhere. He says, at this point, the disciple has not yet come to the conclusion, but they are coming to the conclusion. Elsewhere, it's translated as, you have done everything that you can do on the path. You just have to wait for your time now to ripen and to attain to become an arahant. Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it that way. He said, the monk has done everything that he needs to do at this point. So that is the end of the sutta. He says the simile of the elephant's footprint has been completed in detail. And the Brahmin who was listening, whose name Janusani, said to the Buddha, excellent, you have made everything very clear. Now I can see clearly what the teaching is, and I go to you to be a follower. So that was the way the Buddha laid out the whole teaching in this path. Is that interesting? Are there things in there that you did not expect? Are there things that you think should be in there that didn't appear? Again, remember, this is only one description of the path, but it's fairly typical. In other descriptions, you'll notice he mentioned nothing about practicing the paramita, the 10 parami or perfections. So in other teachings, he may say other things. So again, it's not everything all in sequence, but he's laid it out. You hear about Buddhism, you ordain as a monk, you practice contentment with little, you practice the precepts, you practice the guarding of the sense doors, you practice mindfulness, you practice the giving up or going beyond the 5 hindrances, you practice the 4 jhanas. After the jhanas, you practice the 3 supernormal knowledges, and then you have done everything that you can do. Is this the way that normal people teach Dharma? This is why I like to keep coming back to the suttas, because the teaching gets watered down so many times and by so many people. I think it's important that we go back, even if we don't understand every part that is mentioned. It's important we go back. This is the actual teaching of Sakyamuni Buddha. Yeah. So I want to stop there, and if you have any comments, anything you expected to be in the list or that wasn't in the list, anything that is in the list that you are surprised is in the list. Have you seen this sutta before, or is this the first time you've come across it? You have any reaction?
Oh, Pandit, I'd like to say that thank you very much for tonight. I like your advice to read the suttas. As you say, I've been reading mostly books about Buddhism.
Right.
And I like this getting the word directly. Yeah. There's one thing in there that I have seen before, but I don't really understand what's wrong with appreciating a musical show.
Yeah, that's a funny one. there was at the time two main traditions, spiritual traditions: the Vedic tradition, which was the three Vedas. Later became five Vedas and Upanishads and etc. But it was the three Vedas, and that was the Brahminic tradition, and it was mainly one of learning and recitation, and reciting certain sounds would make one enlightened, supposedly. The other tradition was the Samana, where you would leave the village and home life and go and live in the forest as a renunciate. So the thing that's wrong with music is, if you are a renunciate, you shouldn't be going to see music shows. And that kind of makes sense. You wouldn't expect to see me turn up to a karaoke bar, right? It might be quite amusing. And by the way, a few years ago, there was a monk in Thailand who, at night, he was putting on a regular clothes and going down to the karaoke bar and having a sing-song. And they caught him because in Thailand, we have to shave our eyebrows. So he'd shaved his eyebrows and gone to a karaoke bar, and somebody got suspicious that he had no eyebrows. And so he was caught and then put in the newspapers and shamed. But I think that means Buddhism is in quite a good state if the worst you can find is a monk went for a sing-song in a karaoke bar. People get up to all kinds of naughty things in this world, and that's not such a bad thing. So you would expect that, right? You would expect not to see a monk turning up to a music show. So that's why it's, that rule is given. Now the question then arises is, does that mean that I can listen to music or not? If I just put on my headphones and I don't go to a show and I'm not upsetting anybody, is that acceptable or not? And my conclusion is, it's not part of the path. I don't have to be practicing the total path of Buddhism every minute of every day. So there are times when I kind of bunk off and I put on music. I do it in my own room. I don't play it on speakers. I don't want to disparage anybody. But it does interfere with the meditation. So if one is really getting involved with music, then that's going to run counter to your meditation practice. But you have to find that balance. Nobody is going to meditate with total commitment all the time. You're just not going to do it. I don't do it. I watch Shark Tank and Dragon's Den, a couple of programs that I like to watch. I watch YouTube too much. A few years ago, I started listening to Betty Davis. She's a funk queen from the 1970s. It's just amazing stuff. But I'm very clear, while I'm listening to Betty Davis, I'm not practicing Buddhism. So yeah, find your own way of doing it. It's like most things, if you can grasp onto it and take it to extremes, like the precept of not killing. So the Jains in India at the time had this thing where they would wear gauze over their face, a face mask, just in case they breathed in an animal and killed it. Well, in terms of Buddhism, you're going too far. The sutta here is quite clear. You take up the precept of not killing animals so that you dwell in compassion. But you can take it too far. Do I eat a live bio yogurt? Is that killing all these millions of little yogurt creatures in my yogurt? I've heard Western people having these discussions and trying to decide and blaming monks. You're eating a live bio yogurt. You're a mass murderer of beings. I think the sutta was quite clear. It's just you take on a precept to dwell in compassion and free the mind up. And remember, this was for monks. We went 227 precepts and all these rules. And Buddha's saying just for regular monks, just be nice. So yeah.
So the music part is actually just for the monastic, or is it somewhere in the sutta or something talking about music?
Yeah, we just had in this sutta, which actually gives the 8 precepts, and these 8 precepts are enough, are what were given to monks. So this was 8 precepts was considered enough as a way to attain to enlightenment. So one of the precepts in this, if you remember, I'm going to highlight it now, take a second to come up on your screen. They eat in only one part of the day. They abstain from eating at night and the wrong time. They avoid seeing shows of dancing, singing, and music. They avoid beautifying and adorning themselves with garlands, perfumes, and makeup. So yeah, if you go on a meditation retreat, normally you take 8 precepts. That's what you're doing. The same thing that the monks were doing under the Buddha at the time of the Buddha. That's sufficient.
I think some people kind of interpret it as in like, oh, okay, dancing is no good, singing is no good, you know, for Buddhists or something. But is it really true? I thought like, I think in many, you know, ancient tribe, even the Aborigines, I think music is always part of, you know, a spiritual things,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. And I do love gospel music. It's funny that some good gospel music is amazing. And one of my favorite people was James Brown. And he was actually a gospel singer. He grew up in the church. His music came from gospel. And it's quite beautiful. Yeah, in the path of meditation, music plays no part. Now, again, as a set of precepts, you take the precepts for a particular period of time. So if you come on retreat, you take the 8 precepts for the duration of the retreat. But that's not to say that music, singing, shows, beautifying perfumes or whatever, it's not to say that those things are evil or wrong, or that if you're a Buddhist, you can't do them. But while you're doing them, you're not practicing, you know, the path of meditation and enlightenment, which is fine. I think you can't be expected to be on the path of enlightenment the whole time. I think you'd have a difficult life. I myself don't. I tell you, I'm a committed Buddhist and a meditator, but I rarely meditate more than 6 hours a day. And I still watch Shark Tank and Dragon's Den and a couple of things on, I have a few channels that I watch on YouTube. And I read books, and they're not always, you know, that's also not, while I'm reading the book, I'm not engaged on the path for enlightenment. I read a book, I read James Brown autobiography. That was excellent. It was really good. I read the autobiography of Errol Flynn. You know Errol Flynn? I think you have to be older than me to remember Errol Flynn. He was an actor in Hollywood, early days of Hollywood. But his biography was terrific. I mean, he had a really adventurous lifetime. So I really enjoyed reading his autobiography. Right now, believe it or not, I'm reading Ian Fleming, James Bond book. I wanted to see what the original James Bond is like, so I'm reading that. But yeah, while I'm reading James Bond, I'm not engaged on the path to enlightenment. But so you have to find your own way. I think often, especially with Westerners, Thais don't have this, but with Westerners, we read something and then over-apply it. And then we have questions of whether I can eat a bio yogurt. Some years ago, I was in a monastery in Switzerland, in New Zealand. And at that time, the local thieves had figured out that every night the monks go to chanting, and that's a really good opportunity to go and steal things out of their huts. So the monks had this discussion, should they put a lock on their door or not? And what do you think? Should you lock your door or not lock your door? And they said, well, if you lock your door, that means you have attachment. And we're supposed to have no attachments. Now, you'd never have that discussion in Asia. No Thai monk would ever, like, they'd just look at you as if you're stupid. Of course you lock your door. So I think Westerners, we over apply things and say, well, the Buddha said you should never, you can't go to see a show of music. Well, that means if ever you listen to a single song ever in your life, you will never become enlightened. It's just dumb. So, live your life, be mindful, do the practice, do what you can. Yeah.
Also, Bhante, recently I talked to a friend. He's not like into reading sutta or anything like that. He's just an ordinary guy with family. He's working very hard. He's got a job, and then he works extra time, like a few times a week doing cooking, so delivering some food and things like that. But he can easily get into a very deep state of in the meditation. He was just talking to me a few days ago about he say it's very addictive, like when he entered that state, and sometimes it's like he doesn't want to come out, So I was just remember what you say about that state of the brightness, and it's like the bliss, and it probably is those style of state. I never even experienced that before, but to him it's like he say it's addictive to a point that it's become scary, that he say he sometimes didn't want to, like you don't feel like you don't want to come out of that, sort of things. And then sometimes he have to remind himself that he still have a family, he has responsibility. He can't kind of indulge in that state all the time and, not doing things. So is it possible, like, people without even understanding about sutta or Buddha's teaching and things like that, they can just enter that state of, concentration or meditation, so easily?
Yeah. Obviously, it's impossible to talk about somebody else's experience because we don't know what they're attaining to in their minds. But there's a lot of people that spontaneously can do this kind of thing. And I was talking to a young man at a retreat center recently, and I was saying, what kind of meditation do you do? And he was a bit vague, and I was like, no, well, what do you do? And he said, well, the Buddha taught about these Four Noble Truths. I said, no, what do you do when you meditate? And after a while, then he said, well, I enter into these states of concentration. And it turned out he'd been doing these jhana practices that he just attained to very easily. And he said that so long as in his life he's not doing other things, like if he spends all day with people or playing a computer game or doing something dumb, then when he meditates, he can't get to it. He said, but every time he gets himself on retreat or in a quiet place, his mind will just meditate and go through the 8 jhanas, so even deeper than we talked about today. And he finds it very easy. So yeah, and he's just a layman, and he's talking about doing things that I didn't do until I was been a monk for 25 years. So it just depends. You have the different people are at different stages and different abilities. There's one man here in the sutta we talked about at the end, where you see heavens and hells with the mind-made body, goes and sees heavens and hells. And there's one man I know here, he got that on his first meditation. He came to sit with my teacher, and the first time he did meditation, he attained straight to that. And he was a layman who ran the Chao Phraya Princess, which is a big boat on the Chao Phraya River in Bangkok, taking tour groups up and down. I mean, tour groups of 1,000 people going up and down the Chao Phraya River. And so, yeah, you don't have to be a monk or a dedicated meditator. Some people just have that ability to go into it. Funnily enough, the people that can do it naturally tend to not appreciate it very much. and often fall out of the practice and stop doing it. The people that have done it through effort and years of struggle, they tend to appreciate it and understand it a lot more. That's just my observation. But as to it being addictive, there is a teaching in the Visuddhimagga, which is a book came a long time after the Buddha. And in it, he talks about corruption of insight. And he says that in the practice of concentration meditation, one can get overly addicted to it. However, I never saw the Buddha say that. And even in the Visuddhimagga, he also lists all the jhanas and normal regular practices too. He's not saying this corruption of insight is a special thing. He's just saying there is an acknowledgement that there can be a corruption of insight, which means you get too addicted to concentration states. I never saw this anywhere in Buddhism, in original Buddhism. Here's the thing. The concentration states are putting your mind onto an object and holding it there. And that can become pleasant and addictive, but it also becomes dull at some point. So you notice that the attainment of the three higher attainments of past lives and heavens and hells and seeing the end of the asava, these come after you withdraw from jhana or concentration meditation. So there is a second movement after concentration that you do with the mind that has become bright, purified, and steady. So in terms of that person, they're probably getting quite addicted to going to those still silent states where not very much is happening. In order to practice the path, they're going to have to practice as they come out of that state. But look, everybody's at a different stage in the path. Everybody has different experiences. You can only start with what you're doing and go from there. So that person also still has work to do, just like all of us.
Mm-hmm.
But don't be afraid of concentration. That the modern day Vipassana circuits and groups have somehow turned against concentration and said that it's a fault and something to be avoided. Well, that is not true in the original texts. And Bhante Sujato, he lives in Sydney, right?
Yep.
If you ask him, he has a book, says something like how mindfulness beat concentration as the Buddhist practice, something like that. And he lists how and when historically this idea started to arise that mindfulness is somehow opposed to concentration practice. So he has a text that explores that. And Ajahn Brahm also, I mean, he says very clearly, practice concentration, meditation to the ability that you can. Yeah.
Ajahn Brahm's coming to Sydney in February. You missed him just by a few months.
Yeah, I'm of mixed feelings about Ajahn Brahm. I like him, I respect him a lot, and I appreciate that in terms of actual meditation, he is really the go-to person that can really talk about these states. On the other hand, a lot of the time he's just kind of trying to joke around and entertain.
Yeah, depending on the audience, I think, like you just say, you know, because a lot of his audience are kind of not to say new, like, you know, like either beginner. So there's a lot of, say beginner, then he would talk kind of like a beginner things. I think if he can arrange like a small group of people that is already, you know, like practice, and then he can talk about, you know, a deeper stuff. I think. Yeah. Well, oh, it's 9 o'clock. Time passed very fast here. before we end the night. So thank you very much, Bhante, for providing your teachings to us again. And yeah, we are looking forward for your visit to Sydney. So after this, I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. So thank you everyone for being here. So Bhante, may you just give us some blessing.
Sabhi tiyo vivajantu sabbarogo avina satumate bhavatwantarayo asukiti kayuko bhava abhivadana sili sanichang vata pachayino chataro dhamma ti ayu vano sukhang balang. Okay, thank you for hosting me.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So good night, everyone. Thank you for being here.